What if 3 men actually escaped from the most secure prison in America, and one of them is still alive today? That's the question Jack Monroe asked his camera, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. The red recording light blinked back at him in the small studio apartment he called both home and production set. Behind him was a corkboard littered with old news clippings, blurry black and white photos, and a map of San Francisco Bay with a thick red X marked across Alcatraz Island. Jack leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with his future audience. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He paused. Not for dramatic effect, though that was a nice bonus, but because he needed a moment to steady himself. What he was about to share wasn't just another conspiracy theory. It wasn't folklore. It wasn't Hollywood. It was something deeper. More dangerous. More personal. It all started with a letter. One single letter. Sent anonymously to the FBI in 2013. The public never saw it. The Bureau quietly tucked it away, dismissing it as a hoax, until Jack stumbled on a copy in a dusty folder left behind by a dead man, his grandfather. Dear FBI. My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. That sentence changed everything. Growing up, Jack was vaguely aware of the name Alcatraz. It was the stuff of legend, Hollywood thrillers, whispered rumors. No one ever escaped, people always said. But his grandfather, Special Agent Robert Monroe, had never talked about it. Never mentioned his role in the investigation. Never discussed why, after Alcatraz closed, he stopped working for the Bureau and withdrew from public life completely. After Robert's funeral, Jack found an old black box tucked in the back of a closet in the attic. Inside were a stack of old cassette tapes, a few yellow documents, and a photocopy of the letter, with FBI markings at the top. Jack read it once. Then again. Then 10 more times. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night but barely. If you announce on TV that I'll only get 1 year in prison, I'll tell you where I am. The words didn't read like a prank. There was something raw about them, something that didn't quite fit the typical lunatic attention-seeking vibe. Jack started digging. Within days, he realized something terrifying: the FBI had never officially closed the Alcatraz escape case. It was still technically open, despite decades of denial. That's when he hit record. He wasn't a journalist, or a cop, or even an amateur detective. Jack was a documentary filmmaker with a minor YouTube following and a restless itch for truth. He knew a compelling story when he saw one. And if this letter was real, if John Anglin had survived, this could be the biggest untold story of the last century. He clicked off the camera and leaned back in his chair. The room buzzed with quiet tension. He could feel the weight of history pressing in. Alcatraz. 60 years ago, 3 men vanished from its walls. Officially, they drowned in the icy waters of the San Francisco Bay. Their bodies were never found. Their raft, homemade from stolen raincoats, washed up on Angel Island, partially deflated. Authorities declared the escape a failure. But what if it wasn't? What if they made it out? What if they lived entire lives as ghosts, hiding in plain sight? And what if, after all this time, one of them was ready to talk? The next morning, Jack packed a duffel bag and boarded a flight to San Francisco. The first stop, Alcatraz Island. It was a tourist attraction now. Ferries ran every hour, carrying crowds of visitors hungry for ghost stories and selfies in Cell Block D. But Jack wasn't here for fun. He walked past the displays and interactive exhibits, heading straight for the former prison library, now a restricted research archive. He flashed his press badge, technically expired, but still laminated, and convinced the intern behind the desk to let him into the old records room. A few dusty filing cabinets later, Jack found what he was looking for: inmate files for Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, and John Anglin. As he flipped through them, he noticed something strange. The final entries in each file, handwritten memos, had been redacted. Black ink covered the last 2 pages of all 3 men's records. Sloppy. Hastily done. Like someone panicked and needed them gone, quickly. Jack snapped a few photos and slid the files back into place. Then he wandered down cell block B until he reached the exact cells the men had escaped from. The walls were still chipped. The papier-mâché dummy head still sat eerily in bed. And behind one of the vent holes, hidden by bars, was a thin sliver of blackness where a man once crawled to freedom. Jack stood there in silence for a long time. He could feel it. A shift in the air. Something was buried here, something far deeper than broken stone or corroded steel. That night, back at his hotel, Jack opened the tapes from his grandfather's box. The first one crackled before a deep, tired voice spoke. "If you're listening to this, it means I'm gone. And you've found the letter. You need to understand something, Jack. What happened on Alcatraz wasn't just an escape. It was a cover-up. And they'll come for you if you get too close." Jack froze. Outside, a car engine started. His heart pounded. He moved to the window, but the street was empty. Just shadows. Just silence. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next morning, the San Francisco fog clung to the city like a memory it couldn't let go. Jack sat at a small cafe in North Beach, sipping a black coffee that tasted more like engine oil than caffeine. His hands were shaking. Not from the coffee, but from the voice on the tape. His grandfather, Robert Monroe, was a man of few words. Stoic. Cold, even. Jack only remembered him from a handful of stiff family holidays, Thanksgiving dinners where Robert said grace like it was a court deposition, and birthdays where he handed out envelopes instead of hugs. So hearing that voice, warm but weighted, speaking directly to him from beyond the grave, it hit different. "You need to understand something, Jack. What happened on Alcatraz wasn't just an escape. It was a cover-up. And they'll come for you if you get too close." Jack hit play again. The old cassette word. "They told the world those men drowned. That the bay swallowed them whole. But I followed the evidence, Jack. And I found something they didn't want me to find." Static. Then silence. Tape hissed. Click. End of recording. Jack sat back, exhaling hard. His mind was racing. If Robert knew the truth, why didn't he tell anyone? Why keep it locked away, buried in an attic, hidden for decades? And why now? Why him? He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a name he hadn't dialed in over a year: Thomas Monroe. His father. For most people, fathers are role models or at least constants. For Jack, his dad had been more like an unresolved math problem. Distant. Logical to a fault. A man who believed in rules, not rumors. And certainly not conspiracy theories. Still, if anyone knew why Robert had those tapes, it was Thomas. Jack tapped the call button. 1 ring. 2. 3. Click. Jack. His father's voice was flat, immediately guarded. "Hey. I found something, about Grandpa. I need to talk to you." A pause. "Is this about that damn island again?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "So you do know." "I know enough to stay away." "So should you." Jack clenched his jaw. "He left me something. A tape. He said they didn't drown." Thomas exhaled, slow and heavy. "I always knew he was obsessed. I didn't know he'd drag you into it too." "He didn't drag me. I went looking. Then stop. Jack's voice hardened. Why? Because it's dangerous. Because it's true. No, Jack, his father snapped. Because it doesn't matter anymore. There it was, the wall. The Monroe family defense mechanism, silence wrapped in logic. Jack ended the call without another word. Later that day, Jack returned to his apartment in L.A. It felt colder than usual. His inbox was flooded with comments from his teaser video, most of them skeptics, a few trolls, and one cryptic message from a user called DocRat62. You're not the first to go looking. The others went quiet. I won't say more here. Meet me at Pier 33. Tomorrow. Noon. Come alone. Jack's pulse quickened. He stared at the screen, rereading it twice. Pier 33, the same place where ferries left for Alcatraz. Coincidence? Or bait? He didn't care. He was going. That night, Jack found an old shoebox in his closet marked, Monroe Family Archives, in faded Sharpie. Inside were yellowed photos, brittle with age, and a few letters from Robert to his wife, Jack's grandmother. One letter, dated July 1962, just weeks after the infamous escape, stood out. Margaret. They're lying. I've seen the logs, the reports that were buried. There was a boat in the bay that night. Not ours. Unregistered. No record. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. My supervisor told me to let it go. That it was out of our hands. But I can't. Something happened on that island. And I can't sleep knowing the truth is still locked up just like those men once were. Jack stared at the letter, heart pounding. Even back then, Robert had sensed the cracks. The inconsistencies. The truth hiding in plain sight. And now, 60 years later, Jack was walking the same path. With fewer allies and more cameras. The next morning, Pier 33 was blanketed in fog again. Gulls circled overhead, crying out like lost souls. Tourists filed onto the next ferry to Alcatraz, laughing and snapping selfies, blissfully unaware of the secrets buried beneath their feet. Jack waited near the edge of the dock. At 12:07, a man in a worn navy peacoat approached. He looked about 70, weathered but strong, like someone who'd spent most of his life at sea. You Jack? The man asked, keeping his eyes low. Yeah. You DocRat62. The man smirked. Stupid name. But yeah. They walked to a quiet bench overlooking the water. I worked security here. Back in the 80s, the man said. I got curious about the escape too. Started digging. Made friends with an old Coast Guard guy. He swore he saw something that night, something big. Like what? Jack asked. A spotlight on the water. A small boat headed out past the Golden Gate. No official patrol. No ID. He said it moved like it knew where it was going. Did he report it? He did, the man said. Got transferred 3 weeks later. Never talked about it again. Jack's stomach twisted. Same story. Different decade. You want my advice? The man said, standing up. Don't go chasing ghosts. You find them, they might follow you home. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He stared out his window at the LA skyline, the city buzzing below like it didn't care about old prisons or forgotten men. But Jack cared. He had to. Because maybe the story wasn't just about what happened on that island. Maybe it was about everything that came after. Jack Monroe wasn't a guy who made friends easily, but when it came to chasing ghosts, he knew one name kept popping up, Lisa Ortega. She was a historian, but not the academic ivory tower kind. Lisa was a field researcher, a document digger, a mythbreaker. And she had a reputation in niche circles, especially among prison history buffs, for being obsessed with Alcatraz in the same way a shark is obsessed with movement. If she ever stopped digging, she'd probably die. Jack had followed her blog for years. The Rock Uncovered. No fluff. No melodrama. Just meticulous breakdowns of escape attempts, staff logs, meal schedules, and every inch of the prison's infrastructure. She once spent 3 months reconstructing the plumbing layout of Cell Block D just to prove a theory about how noise covered up tunnel digging. If anyone could help him decode the letter, and validate whether it had any shot at being real, it was her. He sent her an email with the subject line, "I think I found John Anglin." 3 hours later, she replied. "Meet me. I'm in Oakland. Bring the letter. And don't bring anyone else." Jack drove across the Bay Bridge in silence, the city lights glowing in his rearview like fading stars. He wasn't sure what to expect. He'd met a few experts before, most of them were either full of themselves or completely broke. But when Lisa opened the door to her modest house just outside Lake Merritt, she looked more like a storm chaser than a scholar. Sweatshirt. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Sharp eyes. Alert. "You're taller than I expected," she said, then stepped aside without smiling. "Nice to meet you too." They walked into a cluttered living room. Books stacked on books. Boxes labeled "Inmate Profiles" and "Morgue Photos." A giant map of Alcatraz's layout pinned to the wall with color-coded threads. "Show me the letter," Lisa said, gesturing to the coffee table. Jack handed it over. She scanned it with surgical focus. Her finger traced each line. When she got to the closing signature, "John Anglin," she didn't laugh, didn't scoff. She nodded. "This isn't the first time I've seen this," she said. Jack's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" She pulled a file from a shelf and tossed a photocopy on the table. It was the same letter. But with different handwriting. This one came in 1993. Same claims. Same wording. Different penmanship. "I've been trying to find the source for years." Jack's mind reeled. So someone's been pretending to be John Anglin for decades? Lisa shook her head. Not necessarily. Could be him. Could be someone close. But there's a pattern, every 10 to 15 years, a new letter. Quietly passed to the FBI. Never made public. Until now. Jack leaned in. Why would the FBI hide it? Lisa gave him a look. Because if it's real, then they failed. Worse, they lied. And nobody likes a government agency that loses 3 prisoners and then gaslights the nation about it. She handed him a file labeled 1963, Super 8. What's this? Lisa cracked a smile for the first time. This? This is our next clue. She unfolded a photo, grainy, black and white, slightly blurred. 3 men, barely visible, wading waist-deep in water. One looking back. The shoreline behind them didn't match Alcatraz or Angel Island. Where was this taken? Somewhere near the Marin headlands. A tourist was testing a Super 8 camera the morning after the escape. Didn't realize what she captured until weeks later. Turned it into the FBI. They dismissed it. Jack studied the photo. That could be anybody. Lisa nodded. Or it could be them. Jack's pulse picked up. The fog in his brain started to clear. This wasn't a random shot in the dark. There were breadcrumbs. A trail. One that had been covered up, but not completely erased. Lisa stood. So, what's your end game? Jack hesitated. I want to tell the story. The real one. On camera. From beginning to end. Let people decide for themselves. You're making a doc. Yeah. If I can survive making it. She looked amused. You think they're gonna come after you? They already started, he said, pulling out his phone. He showed her the threatening message, the incident with the hotel break-in, and the Coast Guard testimony from the dock rat encounter. Lisa's face shifted. Not doubt, confirmation. You're not the first to stir this up, she said quietly. But you might be the loudest. That night, they sat on her porch with 2 warm beers and a laptop running voice analysis software. They played the audio from Jack's grandfather's tape again. Lisa leaned in. He sounds scared. He never showed fear when I was a kid, Jack said. He was like, steel. But this? This is the voice of someone who knows he's carrying something heavy. Then we need to lighten the load, she said. Together. Jack didn't know what it was, but for the first time since he started this madness, he felt something close to relief. Someone else believed him. And better, someone else knew more than he did. The partnership was official. They were in. Later that night, Lisa sent Jack a scanned page from an old FBI internal memo marked classified, do not distribute. Subject, Anglin, John/Anglin, Clarence/Morris, Frank, case open until confirmed. Date, July 1962. Last line, if any of them is alive, this department will suffer irrevocable reputational damage. Jack stared at the words. Then looked out the window. Somewhere out there, the truth was still walking around. Breathing. Maybe even watching. The next morning, Jack and Lisa were on the 7:45 a.m. ferry to Angel Island, the lesser-known neighbor to Alcatraz. While tourists flocked to The Rock, Angel Island had quietly become a haven for local hikers and history nerds. But back in 1962, it had been key to the escape. According to the official story, after slipping through a vent, crawling through utility corridors, and climbing to the roof, the 3 escapees made a homemade raft from stolen raincoats. They set off into the frigid waters of the bay, never to be seen again. Until, allegedly, the raft washed up on Angel Island. If that letter was real, if John Anglin had lived, this island was one of the last places he'd been before vanishing for good. Lisa stepped onto the rocky trail like she'd done it 100 times. Jack followed, lugging a GoPro and a backpack filled with gear. His mind kept cycling through a single question. Why would someone lie about a failed prison break for 60 years? It doesn't make sense, he said aloud, just behind her. You can't fake surviving an escape like this. If you were going to lie, you'd just say you made it to Mexico or something. Not mail the FBI a letter from cancer treatment. Lisa nodded. Exactly. That's why I don't think it's a fake. I think it's unfinished. Unfinished? Yeah, she said, stopping at a small overhang near the water. People think they either drowned or disappeared. But what if there was a third option? Jack raised an eyebrow. Lisa gestured to the rocks. What if someone helped them disappear? They sat down on a bench overlooking the cove. Lisa opened her tablet and pulled up an old police dispatch log she had scanned for microfilm last year. This was never released to the public. Local Marin police reported an unidentified boat anchored near Point Blunt at 3:22 a.m. on June 12, 1962. About 45 minutes after the escape. Did anyone follow up? Jack asked. No record of it, Lisa said. And the boat was gone by sunrise. Jack felt a chill. Whoever helped them knew exactly what they were doing. Exactly. And that's what makes this different. Escapes are desperate. But this? This was coordinated. Back at Lisa's house that night, they started combing through a new stack of documents Lisa had pulled from FOIA requests, old case files, interview transcripts, and surveillance logs. That's when they found the first major crack. A memo, dated 1979, from a federal marshal's office in Georgia. It referenced an anonymous tip about 2 men living on a farm outside Savannah, matching the Anglin brothers' general descriptions. The file included a note from the U.S. Marshals, no further investigation pursued. Lead deemed unsubstantiated. Jack frowned. Why wouldn't they follow up on that? Lisa leaned in. Because they didn't want to find them. That night, Jack uploaded the second episode of his documentary series. It was titled, Buried Leads: Did the FBI Ignore an Alcatraz Escape Tip in Georgia? Within 24 hours, the video had over 200,000 views. And the threats began. The first was an email. No subject. No signature. You're playing with fire. Stop before you get burned. The second came by phone, an unknown number that called 5 times in the span of an hour. Jack picked up on the sixth. Nothing but breathing. Then a click. Lisa wasn't surprised. You go poking around closed cases, someone's gonna notice, she said. But who? Jack asked. And why now? This happened 60 years ago. Lisa stood by the window, arms crossed. Because the damage wasn't done in 1962. It's happening right now. If you prove they survived, then every official report gets called into question. Every closed case becomes a maybe. People lose careers. Maybe worse. That night, Lisa's security system glitched. The cameras at the back of her house shut off for 7 minutes. When she reviewed the feed, it just skipped, like someone had tampered with it. Jack's phone, too, was acting strange. He stopped receiving emails. His browser kept redirecting to a server not found page every time he tried to access government sites. We're being watched, he said. Lisa didn't disagree. The next day, they visited a retired guard named Ray Hanley, one of the last living staff members who had worked Alcatraz the night of the escape. He lived in a quiet nursing home in Daly City, and Lisa had spent months trying to track him down. Ray was 92 and almost fully blind. But his memory was sharper than either of them expected. You're the fourth person who's asked me about that night, Ray said, as they sat in a sunlit courtyard. Jack blinked. Fourth? Ray nodded. In the last 10 years, I mean. Always a guy in a suit. Not FBI. Not exactly not FBI either. What did they ask? Lisa said gently. The usual. Was the vent big enough? Could they have made it off the island? Did I see anything strange? And did you? Jack asked. Ray paused. Yeah, he said finally. I saw a flashlight signal. Out on the water. 3 quick flashes. Then a pause. Then 2 more. Navy code 4, safe to approach. Jack looked at Lisa. Someone had been waiting for them. When they got back to Lisa's place, she checked her voicemail. A new message had arrived. No ID. Stop filming. We know where your files are. Next time, we won't knock. The voice was synthetic, filtered. Jack's blood ran cold. They weren't just chasing the truth anymore. Now, the truth was chasing them. Jack's tires crunched onto the gravel driveway of a house that hadn't changed since 1997. Same brown shutters. Same warped welcome mat. Only now, he wasn't visiting as a son. He was confronting a witness. His father, Thomas Monroe, stepped out onto the porch the moment Jack's car came to a stop. As if he'd been watching. Waiting. Figured you'd show up, he said. Jack stepped out slowly, GoPro in his hand but not recording, yet. I need answers, Jack said. Thomas crossed his arms. Not with that thing you don't. Jack hesitated, then dropped the GoPro on the passenger seat. Fine. Just talk to me. Off the record. Thomas didn't move. You think putting this on YouTube makes you a journalist? No. But it makes me someone asking questions. And no one else seems to want to answer them. That got a twitch of the eye from Thomas. He turned and walked inside. Jack followed. The house smelled the same, cedar and old coffee. In the den, dusty books lined the shelves like soldiers standing at forgotten posts. Jack glanced around at the memorabilia. His grandfather's old FBI service plaque still hung over the fireplace. Jack stared at it. "You kept it," he muttered. Thomas sat on the couch. "He earned it. Doesn't mean he wasn't wrong." "About what?" "About chasing ghosts." Jack didn't sit. "You think this is just about the escape?" "Dad, the FBI covered something up. Grandpa knew. He left me that tape for a reason." Thomas's voice dropped. "He left that tape because he didn't want me carrying the weight anymore. So now it's yours." Jack stared at him. "You knew." Thomas looked up. His face didn't shift. But his eyes betrayed something. "Not everything," he said. "But enough." Jack finally sat down, the air between them now thick with old grief and new tension. "Tell me." Thomas sighed. "Your grandfather never got over that case. It was like a splinter under his skin. He told me once, if those men made it out, then the whole system was a lie. He couldn't live with that." Jack leaned in. "So what did he do?" "He followed a trail the Bureau told him to drop. He started getting close. Too close. They reassigned him. Then quietly pushed him into retirement." Jack's stomach turned. He was silenced. "No," Thomas said. He was scared. And when you're scared in that line of work, you don't blow whistles. You disappear." Jack stood, pacing now. "So why not tell me? Why not tell the world?" Thomas finally raised his voice. "Because the world doesn't want the truth, Jack. They want certainty. They want heroes and villains. And when you tell them the line between the two is paper-thin, they turn on you." Jack's hands shook, but not from anger, from clarity. His whole life, his father had been distant. Cold. Not because he didn't care, but because he'd been guarding something fragile. Something dangerous. "You've been living under this shadow your whole life," Jack said. Thomas didn't deny it. "You ever wonder if they're still out there?" Jack asked. Thomas stared out the window. "I think they were. For a long time. But if even one of them's still breathing now, I doubt he wants to be found." Jack nodded slowly. "But I do," he said. "And I think I already am." Back in the car, Jack pulled up the anonymous message Lisa had received. "Stop filming. We know where your files are. Next time, we won't knock." And another one had arrived during the visit. This time, it was a short video clip. Black screen. Then static. Then, a single frame. A grainy photo of a man who looked like John Anglin. Gray hair. Wrinkled face. Standing in front of a mailbox in some rural town. Then the video ended. No caption. No location. No explanation. Jack stared at it. Then forwarded it to Lisa. "Lisa, text message. This isn't just a threat. It's a message." "Jack. What kind of message?" "Lisa. They want us to know we're close." That night, Jack sat in a cheap motel off I-5, staring at the photo frame pulled from the video. He opened his laptop and loaded a facial recognition plugin. Cross-checked it with every known photo of John Anglin. Match probability, 82.6%. He tried to feel excited. Or vindicated. Or terrified. Instead, he felt responsible. If this man was still alive, and if people were risking everything to keep it quiet, then maybe it wasn't just a manhunt anymore. It was a moral decision. Expose the truth, or protect a man who'd spent his life running from the lie. The motel phone rang at 2:14 a.m. Jack answered, half asleep. A woman's voice, calm, clear, firm. "You're not the only one looking anymore. And if you find him, don't be surprised if someone else finds you." Click. Jack didn't sleep the rest of the night. He didn't even close the laptop. Because at this point, it wasn't just about the escape. It was about why the truth had stayed buried so long. And who was still willing to bury it. Again. The town was called Miller's Creek, a tiny dot on the northern edge of Alabama, wrapped in farmland and half-forgotten roads. It didn't appear on most modern maps. But the mailbox in the grainy photo? It did. Lisa tracked it using the serial number stamped on the side, visible in one frame of the video clip. The internet had its own language, and Lisa knew how to speak it fluently. "This is it," she said, zooming in. "That's a USPS marker from a rural route assigned to Miller's Creek, AL, population under 400. No chain stores. Closest Wi-Fi is probably 2 counties over." Jack stared at the screen. "We're looking for a ghost in a ghost town." "Then we go analog," Lisa replied. They flew into Birmingham, rented a Jeep, and drove 3 hours northeast into a stretch of the South where time seemed to have paused somewhere around 1976. The town didn't have a sign. It had a post office the size of a garden shed, a diner with a half-lit, open, sign, and a gas station that still had rotary pumps. Everyone noticed when they arrived. The kind of place where strangers don't blend. Jack and Lisa walked into the diner. The conversation died as quickly as it had started. A dozen eyes tracked them like security cameras with skin. Jack smiled awkwardly. "We're just passing through." No one responded. Lisa glanced around. The walls were filled with faded pictures of baseball teams, church barbecues, and black and white portraits of town founders. In the corner, an older man sat alone at a booth. He wore a navy cap and mirrored sunglasses. Even indoors. Jack nudged Lisa. "Looks military." She nodded. "Or someone who wants to look like it." They ordered coffee and pie they didn't touch. After 20 minutes, the man in the cap stood, walked past their table, and without turning his head, said under his breath. "If you're looking for the man in the photo, you already found him." Then he walked out. Jack and Lisa exchanged a glance. Lisa tossed cash on the table, and they followed. Outside, the man stood by a rusted pickup, one boot propped on the bumper, lighting a cigarette. Lisa spoke first. "You knew him?" The man exhaled smoke. "I knew of him. Everyone here did. Went by Mr. Clay. Lived on the edge of town. Never caused trouble. Quiet. Kept to himself." Jack stepped forward. "Was it him? Was it John Anglin?" The man eyed him. "I didn't say that. But you think it." The man flicked ash off the end of the cigarette. "Let me put it this way, he showed up in '74, paid cash for a cabin, never told anyone where he came from. Every time the census came around, he disappeared for 2 weeks. Never owned a phone. Never took a picture." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "When did he die?" The man chuckled, but it wasn't amused. "Who said he's dead?" They drove to the edge of town, following vague directions the man gave them. Left at the rusted mailbox, past the creek, second dirt path. The road twisted into the woods, surrounded by trees that leaned in like eavesdroppers. Then, it appeared. A 1-story wooden cabin, paint peeling, roof bowed, windows shuttered. Jack got out first. The place felt abandoned, but not destroyed. Lisa picked the lock in under a minute. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old tobacco. A single chair. A folded quilt. Books on the shelf, mostly history and farming manuals. And one photo frame turned face down. Lisa picked it up. Three men in a black and white photo. Standing beside an old Chevrolet truck. One of them looked exactly like John Anglin, only 40 years older. Jack stared at the face. That's him. Lisa nodded. And that's the same truck we passed on the way in. Behind that barn. Jack stepped back. He is still here. They turned to leave, but a creak on the porch froze them. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, thin, weathered. Gray beard, sun-leathered skin, sharp eyes. He didn't flinch when he saw them. You shouldn't be here, he said. Jack swallowed. Mr. Clay. The man said nothing. Lisa spoke gently. We're not law enforcement. We're not trying to hurt you. Then why are you filming ghosts? Jack stepped forward. Because you're not a ghost. You're a man. And I think your name is John Anglin. The silence was long. Then the man smiled, faintly. Names don't matter out here. Only the choices you made to get this far. They sat on the porch. Jack didn't record. Lisa didn't take notes. It wasn't an interview. It was a confession. I didn't ask to be remembered, the man said. I asked to be left alone. But the world doesn't let people like me vanish clean. It keeps looking. Jack nodded. So why tell us anything now? Because maybe it's time someone told it straight. Before the story gets buried for good. He didn't give them everything. Not yet. But he gave them a start. A boat. A man on the outside. A new identity provided by people higher up than anyone at Alcatraz. I wasn't just escaping prison, he said. I was escaping a deal that had already been made. Jack blinked. A deal? But the man didn't elaborate. He simply stood and walked into the trees behind the house. No goodbye. Just gone. As they drove away, Lisa was silent for the first 10 miles. Jack finally asked, You believe it's him? Lisa nodded. But we can't prove it. Not without DNA. Jack stared out the window. Then we get it. They didn't talk much on the drive back from Miller's Creek. Not because they were tired, though they were, or overwhelmed, though that too, but because something had shifted. They had just looked into the eyes of a man who, for all intents and purposes, had died 60 years ago. A ghost with a pulse. Now they needed proof. Jack's documentary had gone from internet curiosity to national conversation. News outlets were referencing it. Reddit threads exploded with theories. The FBI hadn't responded, but that silence was louder than any denial. Lisa booked them into a roadside motel just outside Huntsville. That night, she opened her laptop and created a folder on the desktop. Project Clay, DNA Pathways. The first problem, they needed a known Anglin relative. The second, almost every known member of the Anglin family had long since retreated from the public eye, deliberately. But Lisa had a lead. Marie Anglin Doyle, she said, spinning her laptop around to face Jack. Niece. Lives in Florida. Used to talk about her uncles all the time. Until the 80s. Then suddenly, nothing. Went off the grid. Moved inland. Taught third grade for 30 years. Jack nodded. Let's go to Florida. Lisa raised an eyebrow. We ask, she says no. Then what? Jack gave her a look. We don't take anything. We ask again. Nicely. They drove 16 hours to rural Central Florida. Lake County. Wide roads. Palm trees. Tractors at church on Sunday. Marie lived in a small beige ranch-style house with wind chimes and a "Welcome Friends" sign by the door. Jack waited in the car while Lisa knocked. An older woman opened the door, maybe mid-70s, silver hair in a ponytail, bright green eyes. She didn't seem startled. Just, disappointed. I was wondering when someone would come knocking, she said. Lisa kept her voice soft. You know why we're here. Marie sighed and stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. You want to know if Uncle John's still alive? Lisa nodded. We think he is. But we need proof. Marie stared at her wind chimes, lost in thought. My daddy believed they made it, she said. Said he saw John once, in a crowd in Atlanta, years after the escape. Never said a word to him. Just nodded. Said it was enough. Jack walked up slowly. We're not here to exploit him. Or you. Marie studied him. You his grandson? She asked. Jack nodded. Then you understand why some ghosts should stay ghosts. It took an hour. Maybe 2. But finally, over coffee and quiet stories, Marie agreed. A saliva swab. Done gently. Stored in a sterile container. Jack promised they'd handle everything themselves. She handed it over with one condition. If it's him, she said, don't turn him into a headline. Let him be a man who got away. Jack promised nothing. But he felt the weight of the request like a chain around his chest. Back in Alabama, they returned to the cabin in Miller's Creek. It was empty. Like it had never existed. The books were gone. The photo. Even the chair. But Jack found one thing on the windowsill. A toothbrush. Still damp. Either he's still close, Jack said, or he left this for us. Lisa nodded. Let's pray there's enough DNA on it. They shipped both samples to an independent genetic lab Lisa trusted in Arizona. The results would take 5 days. 5 very long days. Back in Oakland, Jack resumed filming. The next video in the series was titled Chapter 5, The Man Who Lived, Our First Meeting with John Anglin. It exploded. Within 48 hours, 1.3 million views. Mainstream news caught on. Jack got interview requests from CNN, 60 Minutes, and the Joe Rogan Experience. He said no to all of them. This wasn't finished. And then, the threats got personal. First, Lisa's apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen. Just a single item moved. Her framed college degree had been taken off the wall and placed on her bed. A message. Jack found his childhood home's mailbox ripped out of the ground. Nails pulled clean. Left on the driveway. Someone was watching both of them. Lisa paced her apartment while Jack sat, stunned. They want to shake us, she said. It's working, Jack muttered. Then Lisa's phone buzzed. Email from the lab. Sample match confirmed, 98.9% likelihood. Subject known as Mr. Clay is biologically related to Marie Anglin Doyle. Status, confirmed nephew-uncle relationship. Jack stared at the screen. Then looked at Lisa. He's alive, she whispered. And now the whole damn world's going to know. Jack stared at the DNA report for what felt like hours. 98.9% match. That number wasn't theory. It wasn't speculation. It was fact, the kind that could tear holes through official history, courtroom records, FBI testimony, and decades of American myth-making. It was the kind of truth people protected. And now it was sitting on his laptop, ready to detonate. Lisa sat across from him, typing silently. Video title, she asked, her tone steady. Jack swallowed. We found him, John Anglin is alive. Lisa nodded, fingers flying. We'll build it around the science. No fluff. No clickbait. Just the proof and the photo. Do we blur his face? Jack asked. Lisa paused. That one question held everything, ethics, danger, legacy, exposure. I think we let him be seen, Lisa said slowly. But we don't give a location. No address. No maps. We give people the truth, not the man. Jack nodded, but his stomach twisted. They were lighting a fuse. That night, Jack stayed in Lisa's guest room. Neither of them felt safe alone anymore. At 2:42 a.m., Lisa's laptop lit up with a notification. An anonymous email. Subject: You still have time to walk away. The body was a single line. Truth is a mirror. Break it, and the shards will find your throat. Attached, a photo. Lisa and Jack in the diner, 2 days ago. Taken from across the room. Jack's pulse spiked. They were in the room, he whispered. Watching. Lisa didn't say anything. She just went to her closet and pulled out a second lockbox. Inside, a burner phone, a USB drive, a printed copy of the DNA results, and a 4 terabytes hard drive. What is that? Jack asked. She handed it to him. Everything. The footage. The interviews. The files. If anything happens to me, you upload it. He looked at her. Same. By morning, the video was edited and scheduled. Premiere time, 8 p.m. Friday. It was Wednesday. 2 days. A countdown they couldn't stop. Lisa kept the files in 3 cloud backups, each on different servers. One on the dark web. One in Iceland. One through an encrypted journalist network. No one scrubbing this, she said. Not unless they shut down half the internet. Jack called his dad. Thomas answered on the second ring. I know what you're going to say, Jack began. I don't think you do, Thomas replied. Because I'm going to tell you not to stop. Jack blinked. What? Thomas sounded tired, but resolved. I spent my whole life trying to keep that secret buried. But maybe that was just me being afraid of the weight. You're stronger than I was. Jack's throat tightened. You really believe that? Thomas chuckled. No. But I needed to say it anyway. That afternoon, a man in a delivery uniform rang Lisa's doorbell. She didn't recognize the company logo. Jack opened the door. No one was there. Just a small box on the doorstep. Inside, a torn piece of fabric, soaked in red. And a note. Don't mistake curiosity for immunity. They filed a police report. The officer who showed up barely disguised his skepticism. You think this has to do with some Alcatraz video? He asked. Lisa showed him the photo. And the DNA report. And the threats. The officer's tone changed. Rapidly. We'll forward this to the feds. Jack's eyes narrowed. You think they'll actually protect us? The officer didn't answer. Just nodded stiffly, and walked out. Thursday was a blur of logistics, prepping the release, notifying their web contacts, drafting a public statement. Lisa built a press kit and prepared for the media storm. Jack finalized the voiceover. By sunset, they had everything ready. Except their nerves. That night, Jack had a dream. He was on the roof of Alcatraz. Rain pouring. Prison alarms blaring. But when he looked down at the bay, there wasn't water. There was fire. And someone, John, maybe, standing in the flames, shouting. You think escape ends with freedom? It ends with witnesses. Then the flames swallowed everything. He woke up drenched in sweat. Lisa was already up. I can't sleep either, she said, sipping black coffee. Then she turned her laptop toward him. Someone posted this on a private message board I monitor. It was a thread titled, The Truth About Clay, Stop the Upload. Beneath it, a list of IP addresses, some partial GPS data, and a line that sent chills through both of them. Their next move is Atlanta. Stop them before Friday. Jack stared at it. Atlanta? Lisa nodded slowly. Then that's where he went. That's where he's hiding now. Atlanta. Sprawling. Chaotic. Noisy. The kind of city that swallows people whole. Perfect for someone who spent 60 years trying not to be found. Jack stared out the car window as the skyline loomed. You think he's really here? Lisa tightened her grip on the wheel. If they're trying to stop us from coming, that's usually a sign we're getting close. They pulled into a small motel off I-285. Jack paid cash. Lisa disabled GPS tracking on both their phones. They knew by now this wasn't just about staying quiet. It was about staying alive. Lisa had traced the thread from the dark web, encrypted chatter between users posting under anonymous names, but one message stood out. Clay relocated. Same pattern as 74. Mail route, park bench, Tuesdays. South Side. She cross-referenced that with old bus stop camera archives, public bench locations, and even trash pickup logs. One place came up 3 times. Grant Park. A public bench by the Rose Garden. The next morning, they arrived early. Jack sat on the bench. Lisa pretended to jog nearby, GoPro hidden in her sports bra. An hour passed. Then 2. Then, at 10:42 a.m., a man walked by. Slow. Gray beard. Dark glasses. Same coat from Miller's Creek. Same gait. He didn't sit. But he passed Jack. And he spoke just loud enough. Still chasing ghosts. Jack stood slowly. You didn't disappear. The man turned. No. But I knew you wouldn't stop. Lisa jogged over, slowing to a walk. You left the toothbrush, she said. The man gave a half smile. You needed a push. Jack stepped forward. The video goes live tomorrow night. You'll be exposed. You know that, right? The man nodded. I've been exposed before. The difference is now I get to tell my side. They sat under the trees. He gave them no real name. No address. But what he gave them was context. There was a boat. But not just any boat. It was part of something else. An experiment. Lisa leaned in. Government? He looked at her. Something like that. He spoke about a time in the 60s when prisoners were used like test subjects, people no one would miss. Some were promised freedom for cooperation. Others were just, moved around. Rebranded. Forgotten. You think I escaped? They let me go. Because the alternative was, worse. Jack's hands trembled. This wasn't just a prison break, he said. It was a cover-up. The man nodded. And now it's your turn to decide if the world's ready for it. They parted ways in silence. Jack didn't ask where he was staying. The man didn't say. Back at the motel, Lisa encrypted the footage and uploaded it to a backup server. They set the video premiere for 8 p.m. Friday, less than 36 hours away. Everything was in place. Except for one thing. At 3:17 a.m., someone knocked on their motel room door. Jack was instantly awake. He peeked through the peephole. Nobody. But something was slipped under the door. A folded manila envelope. Inside, a photo of Jack and Lisa with Clay in the park, taken that morning. Behind it, a typewritten note. If the video goes live, your story ends. So does hers. Lisa stared at it. They followed us. Jack's jaw clenched. They're not trying to scare us anymore. They're threatening us. Lisa opened her laptop. Then we don't wait. Jack blinked. You mean, upload now? She nodded. If we delay, we give them time. We go live at noon tomorrow. Before they do something we can't undo. The clock on Lisa's laptop showed 11:59 a.m. She glanced at Jack. They'd already made their decision. There was no turning back now. 1 hour early. The world would soon see what they'd uncovered. Here we go, Lisa muttered, clicking the button. The video titled, "We Found Him, John Anglin is Alive," blinked into existence on their YouTube channel. Immediately, the view count began ticking upward. Jack held his breath as the first few seconds rolled by. He could already hear the buzz. The first wave of comments. Wait, what? This can't be real. The man who escaped from Alcatraz? No way. Is this legit? Is John Anglin alive? This is the most insane thing I've ever seen. This can't be true. But the FBI said he died, or did he? Is this some kind of prank? Where's the proof? Jack's stomach churned. He had no idea how deep this rabbit hole would go. The live stream had begun, but it wasn't just their video anymore. Within minutes, news outlets from across the country were picking up the story. CNN, Fox, NBC, they all ran segments about the new DNA evidence. The truth was out there. And so were the consequences. A message popped up on Lisa's phone. Blocked number. She hesitated but picked up. Jack, she said quietly, holding the phone to her ear. It's them. Jack stood, walking toward her. What do they want? Listen carefully, because I won't repeat this, a distorted voice rasped on the other end. You've made a mess. There's still time to stop the floodgates, but only if you pull the video down immediately. Lisa's hand shook. You're threatening us. It's not a threat. It's a warning. You don't want to be involved in this anymore. You'll wish you had never started. Jack's heart hammered in his chest. Lisa gripped the phone tighter. Who are you? What do you want from us? You're already too deep. Pull the video, or things will get much worse for you. The FBI won't save you this time. With that, the line went dead. Lisa looked at Jack, her face pale. They know we won't back down now. I'm not pulling it, Jack said, voice firm. We gave them a choice. They're just trying to scare us. Lisa turned back to her laptop. The comments section was growing by the second. Questions, arguments, wild theories, and then the emails began to flood in. From journalists. From private investigators. From anonymous sources. But amid the chaos, one message stood out. We're watching you. It was signed. Clay's people. The door to their motel room burst open with a crash. Lisa screamed, her laptop falling to the floor as two men in black suits entered. They were fast, methodical. One of them shoved Jack against the wall, the other grabbed Lisa, forcing her to the ground. Jack fought back, but the grip on his arms was steel. What do you want? The man who'd grabbed Lisa spoke, his voice cold and level. You're going to shut down the video. Now. You've stirred up something that was better left buried. Lisa kicked out, knocking over a lamp. You don't scare us. We have the truth now. The man holding her didn't flinch. You don't understand. This isn't just about him. This is about everything. The people who helped him, people you have no idea about. He leaned closer to Jack. You have no idea what you're dealing with. If you keep pushing, you'll lose everything. All of it. Jack locked eyes with him, a mixture of defiance and fear. Then do your worst, Jack spat. The man smiled, a cruel, knowing smile, and then signaled to his partner. The second man raised a gun. Jack's heart nearly stopped. Then there was a loud bang. But not from the gun. Instead, the door to the motel room slammed open again. A second group of men rushed in, this time in tactical gear, shouting orders, weapons raised. They quickly overpowered the black-suited men. One of the newcomers, a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes, approached Jack and Lisa. "Are you okay?" she asked, looking at the two men pinned to the floor. "We're fine," Lisa said, still shaken but unbroken. The woman nodded. "We're with the Federal Witness Protection Program. We've been monitoring your case for days." Jack was confused. You're with the FBI?" She nodded again. "We don't have much time to explain. But you're in over your head. Those men, the ones who threatened you. They're part of a much larger operation. It's not just about Anglin's escape anymore. It's about who helped him, and why." Lisa stood up, her knees shaky. "Who are you really?" "My name is Agent Sarah Hawkins. And we need to get out of here. Fast. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" Jack could still feel his heart pounding in his chest. The adrenaline hadn't worn off since the moment the FBI agents had stormed into the room. The two men in black suits, agents of a shadowy group that had been watching them, were now restrained, their faces bruised and bloodied. They had been swept out of the motel room with military precision. Now, Jack and Lisa sat in a sterile, windowless conference room, the air thick with tension. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them, adding to the suffocating sense of unease. Agent Sarah Hawkins was pacing across the room, her expression hard but determined. She stopped in front of them, exhaling sharply. "I know you have questions," she said. "But we don't have much time." Lisa's eyes were wide, her mind racing. "You're telling us the FBI's been watching us all this time?" Sarah nodded, but didn't seem surprised by the question. "We've been aware of the dangers surrounding this case for years, but we've been working in the shadows, trying to gather evidence without tipping off the people involved. You two brought us to the surface." Jack's mind was reeling. "What are you talking about?" "We thought we were just uncovering the truth about the escape. About John Anglin." Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping low. "That's where you're wrong. The escape wasn't the endgame. It was only the beginning." The room fell silent for a moment before Sarah continued. She began to pace again, her steps measured, deliberate. "The people you've been interacting with, the men in black suits. They're not just private operatives. They're part of a covert faction that traces its roots to the days after Alcatraz was shut down. A group of government officials and powerful individuals who've been manipulating the narrative for decades. They had a hand in controlling what the public knows about Alcatraz, about the escape, and about many of the disappearances tied to it." Lisa swallowed hard. "You're telling us, this goes beyond just John Anglin's escape?" Sarah paused, her eyes meeting theirs. "Much beyond. There are names you don't know, people whose involvement has been covered up for decades. People with power in both the government and in private sectors. If the truth about Anglin's escape gets out, so does the truth about them." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "What do they want with us?" Sarah straightened. "They want the video down. They want to shut you up." Jack's fists clenched. "So you're just here to protect us, then?" Sarah gave a dry chuckle. "We're here to make sure you don't get killed before the Real investigation begins." Lisa was no longer sitting quietly. She was leaning forward, a spark in her eye. "Wait, this goes deeper, doesn't it? You're telling us that Anglin's escape wasn't just about freedom. It was about something much bigger. But what?" For the first time, Sarah's expression softened, as if she were debating whether to share something crucial. "There's a network, Lisa. A network of influence. And the escape wasn't a fluke, it was planned. In fact, Anglin wasn't the only one involved. There were others, prisoners, civilians, even military personnel, who helped him and others like him disappear. She met Jack's gaze. This isn't just a story about a prisoner. It's a story about an organized operation that continues to this day. And right now, you're in the eye of the storm. Once the video spreads, it'll bring down the people who don't want the world to know their dirty little secret. Jack's mind was reeling. This wasn't about uncovering a single escape. This wasn't even just about a prison break. It was about something far more sinister, an entire underground operation that had been allowed to exist, unchallenged, for decades. He glanced at Lisa. Her eyes were intense, but she seemed to be processing the information faster than he could. Sarah leaned against the table, looking at them both. You need to understand. You've made a choice. There's no going back. Once the video goes viral, we can't protect you forever. Lisa exhaled sharply. So what do we do now? Sarah's face hardened. We track down the rest of the network. We figure out who the others are, where they are, and what they're still hiding. But you're going to need to trust us, completely. Jack stood up, frustration mounting. So, what, we become your pawns in this investigation? You want us to sit back and wait for you to handle it? No, Sarah said, her eyes sharp. You won't sit back. You'll be part of this. You have the proof, the evidence, and the connections. But we need you to understand that we are the ones calling the shots now. You'll work with us. Not against us. Lisa leaned in, her voice quiet but intense. Then what do you need from us? The tension in the room was palpable. Jack and Lisa had come to the harsh realization that they were no longer in control of this story. The stakes had been raised higher than they could have imagined. We need you to stay out of the public eye for now, Sarah said, her tone firm. You'll be relocated temporarily while we gather intel. The video has already sparked enough attention. If we don't act fast, you'll be hunted down by both the people who want to silence you and the ones who think you betrayed them. Lisa looked at Jack, her expression determined. If we're in this together, we're going all the way. Jack nodded, a quiet resolve forming in his chest. We finish what we started. No matter the cost. The sun had set over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the city. Jack and Lisa sat in a small, sterile FBI safe house just outside the downtown area. They were alone now, the air heavy with the weight of what they had just learned. Sarah Hawkins had left them with a team of agents to monitor their safety, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were still too exposed. There were just too many people out there, too many unknowns. Lisa paced the floor, her mind clearly racing. I don't know if I'm buying this, she muttered under her breath. Jack didn't look up. He was focused on the encrypted file Sarah had left them. It contained a list of names that were supposed to mean nothing, but as he scrolled down, they began to feel all too familiar. One name in particular stood out, Nate Van Dorn. That's the name from the boat, Jack said suddenly, his voice sharp. Lisa stopped in her tracks. The boat? The one the old man talked about. Jack nodded. Van Dorn. He was the one who arranged the escape route. The man who helped Anglin disappear. This isn't just about one man. It's about the entire system of disappearances. It's about Van Dorn's network. Lisa's eyes narrowed as she processed the name. Van Dorn, she repeated. Wasn't he the one who worked with Clay in the late 70s? Jack turned the laptop toward her. Exactly. And if Van Dorn's still out there, then the people behind Anglin's escape aren't just in the past. They're still active. Sarah called. Where are you? She asked, her voice calm but urgent. We're in the safe house, Lisa replied. What's going on? Is the FBI following up on the names we gave you? Not exactly, Sarah said. That's the problem. Some of the names in your list aren't showing up anywhere. Others have been wiped from government records. It's like they were never there. Jack's stomach dropped. What do you mean wiped? I mean, their existence has been erased. No birth records, no death certificates, no military or prison records. They're ghosts, Jack. Lisa felt a shiver crawl up her spine. You're saying these people didn't just escape, they were erased. Sarah paused, her tone softer. Exactly. Whoever's behind this operation has been covering their tracks for decades. But now that the video is out, it's like a beacon. They'll come after you, and they won't stop. Jack leaned back, running his hands through his hair. So we're supposed to do what? Just wait for them to show up. Sarah's voice became more serious. No. We're going on the offensive. I need you to go to San Francisco. Jack's eyes widened. San Francisco? Why? Because, Sarah said, her voice tight, Van Dorn is there. And he's the key to everything. The decision was made. They would leave the safe house by morning. Lisa stood by the window, looking out over the city. She didn't feel safe. Not here, not anymore. Jack walked over to her, his expression hard. Are you sure about this? We're talking about heading into the lion's den now. Lisa nodded. We don't have a choice. We can't sit around waiting for them to find us. We need to go after them. If Van Dorn is still alive, we need to track him down. Jack sighed, running his hands through his hair. This is insane. I know, Lisa said, turning to face him. But the stakes are higher than we ever imagined. They'll try to bury us, Jack. They'll try to bury this whole story. We can't let them. Their flight was booked for early the next morning. Jack tried to sleep, but the weight of everything hung over him. How had they gotten here? They'd started out just wanting the truth about the Alcatraz escape, and now they were tangled in something much darker. Van Dorn's network. Government cover-ups. Dangerous people in powerful positions. His phone buzzed, and he checked the message. Blocked number. Jack, Lisa's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. What is it? She took a breath. It's happening again. What's happening? The comments. The threats. They've started flooding our email. It's getting worse. Jack opened his laptop and checked the inbox. There were dozens of new messages, some unreadable due to the encryption, but others stood out. They were chilling. You're playing with fire. Stop now. This is your final warning. Shut it down or you're both dead. The past will consume you. Van Dorn knows. And he'll find you. Jack's hands tightened into fists. Are you still sure about this? Lisa asked quietly. Jack stood up. We don't have a choice. We have to see this through. Lisa nodded, steeling herself for the journey ahead. The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, a low, steady drone that did little to calm Jack's nerves. He sat by the window, his eyes tracing the early morning sky as it slowly turned from dark blue to pale pink. The air around them was cold, but the tension inside the small plane was even colder. Lisa sat across from him, her brow furrowed as she reviewed the encrypted files Sarah had sent them. There was no shortage of data, names, locations, operations, all tied to the network they had uncovered. Yet none of it made any real sense. It was as though they were piecing together a puzzle without knowing what the finished picture was supposed to look like. Jack took a deep breath. So, what's the plan when we get there? We can't just walk into San Francisco and expect to find Van Dorn. Lisa didn't look up from the screen. We have to find his old associates first. We know he's been operating under a false name for decades, but there's a chance someone out there still remembers him. We've got to dig deeper into his past connections, especially the ones tied to Alcatraz. Jack ran a hand through his hair. You think we can get that information before someone else does? Lisa paused, finally looking up. Her eyes were sharp, her resolve hardening. We don't have much of a choice. The plane landed at San Francisco International Airport, and the weight of their mission settled more heavily with every passing minute. As soon as they stepped into the terminal, Jack felt the familiar rush of anxiety, the feeling that they were being watched. Lisa must have felt it too. She kept scanning the crowd, her hand on her bag, ever alert. "We need to blend in," she said, her voice low. "Let's head to the car rental desk and figure out where to go." Jack nodded, but a gnawing unease gnawed at him. Something felt off, like they were already being hunted. He'd seen the way people reacted when they got too close to the truth. It was like a switch flipped, and suddenly, they were enemies. They rented a car and drove through the fog-cloaked streets of San Francisco, the city's winding hills and narrow lanes an unsettling metaphor for the labyrinth they were about to enter. Lisa glanced at the map on her phone. "We need to head to Van Dorn's old property on the outskirts. It's where he was last seen working with one of his associates, back in the early '80s. Jack's mind raced. "You're sure it's still there?" "It's not listed in any records. But we know it was his base of operations. If we're lucky, we can get some answers from the people who were involved with him back then." The car hummed along the road as the city's skyline receded into the distance. The farther they drove, the more isolated the landscape became. The fog grew thicker, wrapping the world in a cold, gray blanket. They arrived at an old, decaying warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded up, its roof sagging in places from years of neglect. The area was eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of wind and the distant hum of city traffic. "Is this it?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lisa nodded. "This is where it all started. Van Dorn was involved in shady deals here, smuggling people, organizing escapes. If we're going to find something useful, it's here." They parked the car in the shadows, well away from the building, and carefully made their way toward the entrance. Jack's senses were on high alert. Every footstep seemed too loud, every sound too sharp. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The door creaked open as Jack pushed it, revealing the dim interior of the warehouse. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of decay. The floors were cluttered with broken crates, old papers, and remnants of equipment long forgotten. Lisa crouched down to sift through a pile of papers that looked like they'd been thrown together in a rush. Jack stayed standing, his eyes scanning the room, his instincts screaming that they weren't alone. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. There was a faint sound behind him, footsteps. Quick, deliberate. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun he'd kept concealed in his jacket. But the figure in front of him wasn't who he expected. "Sarah," Jack said, a mixture of relief and surprise flooding through him. Sarah Hawkins stood in the doorway, her expression tense but composed. "You didn't think I'd let you do this alone, did you?" Jack lowered his gun, but his suspicion remained. "What are you doing here?" Sarah walked inside, closing the door behind her. "I had a feeling you'd head here. This is where Van Dorn did most of his work after Alcatraz. But you're not the only ones looking for him, Jack. There are others." Lisa stood up from the pile of papers, a look of concern on her face. "Others? People who want the same thing you do," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing. "And they won't hesitate to kill you to get it." Jack felt his stomach drop. "So, what do we do now?" "We keep moving forward," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "We have one shot at this, and we need to find out who Van Dorn was working with, before they find us." Lisa stepped forward, her eyes fierce. "You're sure Van Dorn is still here?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before nodding. "He's alive, Jack. But he's not the man you think he is." The air inside the abandoned warehouse was thick with tension. Jack, Lisa, and Sarah stood at the center of the room, surrounded by remnants of the past. Old files, yellowing documents, and forgotten equipment. The faint hum of the wind outside only seemed to amplify the silence. Sarah moved first. She crouched near a pile of old crates, her hands sifting through the papers, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jack and Lisa exchanged uneasy glances before they joined her. "We need to find something concrete," Sarah said. Her voice was low but urgent. Van Dorn's operation wasn't just about escaping Alcatraz. He was running a much larger network. Lisa reached for a few files scattered on the floor. "So, what are we looking for exactly?" "Anything that ties him to more recent activities," Sarah replied. "This is bigger than just one man escaping. Van Dorn was involved in a series of disappearances, people who were erased from the system. I think these were orchestrated by him, or at least by the people he worked for." Jack's mind raced. "So you're saying that the people who helped Anglin weren't just criminals? They were part of something much darker?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Exactly. They were part of a broader operation, one that continues to this day. And if we're going to stop it, we need to find out who's still running it." They spent the next hour scouring the warehouse for anything that could shed light on the truth. It wasn't until Lisa pulled out an old, dusty binder from beneath a pile of broken crates that they found something of interest. "Jack, come here," Lisa called, her voice tinged with excitement. Jack hurried over, kneeling beside her as she flipped open the binder. Inside were pages filled with names, some familiar, others foreign, and dates. There were addresses and coded messages that seemed to make no sense. But one thing caught Jack's eye, a series of names, all linked to a particular year, 1985. "That's the year Van Dorn went off the grid," Jack muttered. "Right after he was supposedly involved in helping Anglin escape." Lisa pointed to one of the names, a man listed as Robert Clay. Jack froze. "That name," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's the one who worked with Van Dorn during the escape operation. The one who helped organize the routes." Lisa looked at him, her brow furrowed. "You're saying Clay's involved with this still?" "I think he's more involved than we thought," Jack said, his voice tight with realization. "But what's more concerning is this: these names and dates don't just match up with the escape operation. They're linked to disappearances. People who vanished without a trace in the years following 1985. They were part of the network." Suddenly, a noise interrupted their conversation, a door creaking open in the distance, followed by the sound of footsteps. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He motioned for Lisa and Sarah to stay silent, and they huddled in the shadows of the warehouse, their breaths held. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the light coming from outside. Jack tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his side. "Sarah," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. "Is that one of your agents?" She shook her head. "No. This isn't an agent." The figure stepped further into the room, and as the light caught his face, Jack's blood ran cold. It was Robert Clay. Clay's eyes scanned the room with practiced precision. He didn't seem startled by their presence. In fact, he looked almost pleased. Well, Clay said, his voice smooth. "I should have known you'd find your way here. Always tenacious, Jack. Always the same." Jack stepped forward, his voice low but forceful. "What are you doing here, Clay? You've been hiding for years. Running the same old game, I suppose." Clay chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You think you know everything, don't you? The problem is, Jack, you've only scratched the surface." Lisa glared at him, her voice sharp. "What's the connection? What does Van Dorn have to do with all of this?" Clay's smile grew wider. "Van Dorn? You're still thinking too small. He was just a pawn. You really think someone like him could control all of this?" No. He was expendable the moment his usefulness ended. The truth is, there's always been someone pulling the strings, someone who's been operating in the shadows long before you ever found those files. Jack's heart raced. Who? Clay's grin faded, replaced by a more calculating look. You really want to know? I'll tell you, but you might not be ready to hear it. Before Jack could respond, the sound of approaching cars reached their ears. Clay's face darkened, and he took a step back. They're here, Clay muttered, turning toward the door. You've got one shot, Jack. If you want to survive, you need to get out of here. And you need to do it fast. What's going on, Clay? Who's behind this? Lisa demanded, her voice rising. Clay hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the door as he made a split-second decision. I'm not in charge of this anymore. But you're not ready for what's coming. No one is. And with that, he turned and bolted out of the door, leaving them standing in the middle of the warehouse, stunned and confused. The sound of approaching cars was getting louder. Jack grabbed Lisa's arm, pulling her toward the back of the warehouse. We need to move. Now. Sarah followed close behind, her hand on her sidearm. This isn't over. We've got to stay ahead of them. Whoever is behind this won't stop until they silence all of us. They ran through the warehouse, weaving through debris and down narrow corridors, the sound of their footsteps the only thing keeping time. They reached the back door just as the first of the cars pulled into the lot. Jack turned to look at the others. We need to get to a safe house. Fast. As they sprinted toward the waiting car, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. The tires screeched as Jack slammed his foot on the gas pedal, sending their rental car careening out of the warehouse lot. Behind them, the sound of approaching engines grew louder. The black SUVs chasing them were relentless, dark shadows against the cloudy afternoon sky, closing the gap with every passing second. Lisa gripped the passenger seat, her knuckles white from the force. We're not going to outrun them forever, Jack. We don't need to outrun them, Jack replied through gritted teeth. We just need to stay ahead long enough to find a place to regroup. Sarah, in the back seat, adjusted her seatbelt and pulled her sidearm from its holster. We're running out of options. We can't just keep driving. Jack's mind raced as he navigated the narrow streets of San Francisco. The city was known for its tight corners and steep hills, and while he was an experienced driver, this felt different. This wasn't just a normal getaway. Whoever was chasing them knew exactly how to follow their every move. We need to get to the docks, Jack said, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. There's an old warehouse I used to use. It's hidden, and we can lose them in the shadows. Lisa's head snapped toward him. The docks. That's too dangerous. They'll corner us there. They're already trying to do that, Jack retorted. We don't have much of a choice. The chase continued, the sound of the pursuing vehicles growing louder with every moment. The streets blurred into a cacophony of lights, buildings, and alleyways. Jack's hands were steady on the wheel, but the weight of their situation was starting to bear down on him. They cut through a tight alley, the car scraping against the sides of the walls. Hold on! Jack shouted as he jerked the wheel, narrowly avoiding a large dumpster that sat in the middle of the road. Lisa held her breath, her body slamming against the seat. This is insane, Jack. We need a plan. We have one. Jack said, his voice firm. Get to the docks, then head for the warehouse. I know it like the back of my hand. As they neared the docks, Jack's heart raced. He could see the familiar silhouettes of the old buildings and rusted cranes on the horizon. But he knew that once they reached the open water, there would be no more escape routes. The docks were a dead end. Are we really going to trust that warehouse? Lisa asked, her voice shaky but resolute. I don't have time for anything else, Jack answered. They reached the docks, the rumble of the pursuing SUVs still hot on their trail. Jack swung the car onto a narrow road that led to the old warehouse, the worn-down structure barely visible in the fog. He slammed the brakes as they screeched to a halt in front of the entrance. Without hesitation, they leaped from the car, Sarah leading the way with her gun raised, her eyes scanning every shadow in the distance. "Move," she barked. They darted toward the building, the distant sound of their pursuers' engines roaring closer. Jack reached for the door, fumbling with the lock. His heart was pounding in his chest. Each second felt like an eternity. Finally, the door opened, and they rushed inside, the heavy, metal door slamming shut behind them. Inside the warehouse, everything was dark and silent, save for the sounds of their labored breathing. Jack quickly locked the door behind them, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the dust-choked air. Lisa was the first to speak. "This is insane. We can't just hide here forever." Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved quickly to a large metal box near the back of the warehouse. With practiced movements, he unlocked it and began pulling out old documents and equipment. "What is all this?" Lisa asked, confused. Jack paused, his fingers brushing over the files. "It's the stuff I've been hiding for years. Evidence. Records. But it's not enough. We need to connect all the dots." Sarah joined them, her gun now holstered as she leaned over Jack's shoulder. "This is more than just Van Dorn. You're talking about a network, an underground operation that spans decades." Jack nodded grimly. "It's a secret organization that has infiltrated government agencies, corporations, and more. They're the ones who helped Van Dorn escape, but they didn't stop there. They've been covering up things, hiding people, disappearing them. And now they've set their sights on us." Lisa's eyes widened. "And they'll stop at nothing to make sure we don't get out of here alive." Jack turned toward her, his face hard. "That's why we need to go through these files. There's something here that can expose them. If we can tie their operations back to people in power, then we have a shot at ending this for good." Suddenly, the silence of the warehouse was shattered by the unmistakable sound of gunfire outside. "They're here," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with urgency. Jack's heart skipped a beat. They didn't have much time. "Let's go," he said, his voice grim. "We'll use the back exit and head for the boatyard. There's a chance we can make it out by water." Lisa's eyes were wide. "Are you kidding? A boat? That's your plan? It's better than getting caught out here." "We have no choice," Jack said, already moving toward the back of the warehouse. As they made their way through the dark corridors, the sound of footsteps growing louder, Jack's mind raced. Who could be behind this? How far did this conspiracy go? And just as they reached the back door, a voice rang out from behind them, cold and deliberate. "You're not going anywhere, Jack." Jack's blood froze. Turning slowly, he saw Robert Clay standing in the doorway, flanked by two armed men. "Clay," Jack said, his voice low. "This isn't over." "It's just beginning," Clay replied with a cruel smile. "You've walked into a trap you can't escape." The air in the warehouse felt colder, thicker, as Robert Clay and his armed men advanced. Jack, Lisa, and Sarah were cornered, the dim light from the few broken windows casting eerie shadows on the concrete floor. The weight of the situation was crushing, but Jack refused to let it show. He had no intention of letting Clay win. Clay's smirk never wavered. "You thought you could dig into the past and expose what's been buried for decades. You're out of your league, Jack." Jack kept his eyes on the men flanking Clay. There were two of them, both armed and ready to fight. Clay, however, wasn't holding a gun. His posture suggested he had the upper hand, and he knew it. Lisa whispered urgently, "We need a plan. We can't take all of them on." Jack didn't break his focus from Clay. "We're not fighting them, Lisa. Not yet." Sarah, eyes scanning the shadows of the warehouse, clenched her fists. "We need to find a way out. Now. Clay chuckled, clearly savoring the moment. No way out, Sarah. You've been running from the truth, but the truth has a way of catching up. This has always been bigger than just Van Dorn. This is about power, control, and the legacy of those who shaped the world behind the scenes. Jack's heart sank. He had thought they were chasing shadows, but Clay's words made it clear that they were playing with fire. This wasn't just about a network of criminals. This was about something far more insidious, something that reached into the highest levels of government and beyond. Jack's mind raced. The boat. The only way out was through the docks. But they couldn't just walk out of here, they had to outsmart Clay and his men. Where is it, Clay? Jack said, his voice low, challenging. The real truth. What's your part in this? What's the connection to Van Dorn? Clay's smile faded, replaced by a steely coldness. He took a step closer, his voice now sharp. You really don't get it, do you? Van Dorn was just a cog in a much larger machine. The escape from Alcatraz? It was nothing but a distraction, a smoke screen. The real operations, the real power, lie with the people you've never even heard of. People who built this country from the shadows. Jack's pulse quickened as a chill ran down his spine. You're talking about a conspiracy. A deep state. Call it what you want, Clay sneered. The truth is, people like you, people who try to expose it, end up buried. This game is bigger than any of us. And you just walked into it thinking you could save the world. Sarah moved toward the back door, eyes darting from Clay to the men who were closing in. She pulled her gun out again, steadying herself. We don't have time for your speeches, Clay. Clay didn't flinch. Instead, he gestured toward his men. They don't need to speak. They'll just do their job. Without warning, one of Clay's men lunged toward Sarah. She reacted quickly, spinning out of the way just as his arm swiped at her. The man stumbled, giving Sarah the moment she needed to fire. The shot rang out, echoing through the warehouse, but Sarah's aim was true. The man fell to the ground with a grunt, his weapon clattering on the floor. Move! Jack shouted. The second man raised his weapon, aiming directly at Sarah. Jack dove toward him, knocking the gun off course, the two of them crashing into a pile of crates. The gunfire filled the space once again, but Sarah's quick reflexes kept her alive. Lisa, behind Jack, grabbed an old metal pipe lying against a wall and swung it at Clay's other man. The blow caught him off guard, sending him reeling. He stumbled backward, but he didn't go down. Clay watched it all with a cold detachment, as if this were just another part of his twisted game. You think this will save you? Clay said, his voice calm and chilling. You can't fight a system that's already been in motion for decades. The warehouse was in chaos. Jack, his body aching from the fight, stood up, shaking off the shock. Sarah had taken down one of Clay's men, but they were still outnumbered. Lisa, breathing heavily, grabbed Jack's arm. We can't stay here. We have to keep moving. We need to get to the boat, Jack said urgently, looking toward the back exit. It was their only way out. If they could make it to the boatyard, they might have a shot at escaping. Clay, sensing their desperation, finally spoke again. You think you can escape, don't you? You think a boat will save you from the people who run this operation? You're nothing but pawns in a game you don't understand. Shut up, Clay, Jack snapped, his voice full of anger. You don't control this anymore. With adrenaline pushing them forward, Jack, Lisa, and Sarah moved quickly, darting from cover to cover, trying to stay out of Clay's line of sight. Jack's mind was spinning. He couldn't let Clay get away. He couldn't let this network of corruption continue. They reached the back door of the warehouse, but before they could make it out, Clay's voice cut through the air like a blade. Don't even think about it, Jack. You've dug too deep already. If you think you're going to walk out of here with the truth and your lives intact, you're gravely mistaken. The sound of approaching footsteps was deafening, but Jack didn't hesitate. He pushed through the door, leading the others outside. The fog clung to the ground, hiding their movements, but the sound of the engines from the pursuing SUVs still echoed in the distance. They reached the dockyard, the boats lined up against the water, ready to be taken. Jack had planned this escape for just such a moment, but as they ran toward the closest boat, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Clay's voice echoed from behind them. "Run all you want, Jack. You'll never outrun what's coming." Jack glanced at Lisa and Sarah, both of them breathless and sweating, but determined. "We'll outrun him," Jack said, his eyes locked on the boat. "We're not done yet." With one last burst of energy, they leaped onto the boat, Jack quickly starting the engine. The roar of the motor filled the air, and they sped off into the fog, leaving the warehouse, and Clay, behind. But as the fog closed in around them, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning. They had escaped, but the real battle was far from over. The engine roared to life as Jack pushed the throttle forward, sending the small boat cutting through the murky waters of the San Francisco Bay. The fog had thickened, making it difficult to see anything beyond the bow. The docks were disappearing behind them, swallowed by the mist. For the first time in hours, Jack felt a brief moment of relief. He glanced at Lisa and Sarah, both of whom were sitting on opposite sides of the boat, still breathing heavily from the chaos at the warehouse. The sound of the engine was the only thing breaking the eerie silence that had settled over them. "Did we lose them?" Lisa asked, her eyes scanning the water behind them, though the fog made it impossible to see anything. "For now," Jack replied. "But we're not safe." "Not yet." Sarah, sitting quietly, wiped the blood from her knuckles where she'd been forced to punch one of Clay's men. She looked up at Jack. "What now?" Jack clenched his jaw. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. The boat was the only option left, but the truth of what they were running from was beginning to sink in, much deeper than the escape from Alcatraz or even the Van Dorn conspiracy. There was a power far greater at play, and they were only scratching the surface. The boat cruised further into the bay, a dim light reflecting off the rippling water. Jack adjusted the throttle slightly, trying to cut through the thick fog. They needed to get to a safe location, somewhere they could regroup and figure out their next move. But as he glanced over at Sarah, something in her expression made his stomach drop. Her brow was furrowed, her gaze shifting between the horizon and the silent, dark waters. "What's going on?" Jack asked, noticing her unease. Sarah hesitated for a moment before she spoke. "I'm not sure how to say this, but I think we've been set up." Lisa whipped her head toward Sarah. "What? Set up? You mean?" "I mean," Sarah cut her off, "that I think someone on the inside has been feeding information to Clay. Or worse, someone here with us is working against us." Jack's heart sank. "Are you serious?" "Think about it," Sarah continued, her voice low. "We've been too successful, too far ahead of the game. And every time we get close to the truth, something happens to throw us off track. The warehouse, the sudden appearance of Clay, something's off. It's like someone knew we'd be there, knew exactly how to set the trap." Lisa looked at Jack, her face pale. "But, that means one of us could be the leak." Jack's mind raced. Who? He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to think that someone he trusted could be involved. But Sarah's words lingered in the air like a bitter truth, gnawing at him. "You're sure?" Jack asked, trying to mask the doubt in his voice. "There's no other explanation." "I wish there were," Sarah said quietly, her eyes distant. "But the evidence is piling up. Someone's been feeding information to Clay. Someone who knew where we were going, what we were planning. And right now, I don't know who it is." Jack slowed the boat as they neared an old pier, one that hadn't seen much traffic in years. He wasn't sure if it was the right place to hide, but it would have to do for now. They needed a place to figure this out, and quickly. As the boat neared the dock, Jack looked at Sarah. "Do you have any idea who could be involved?" She shook her head, her face tense. "No, but I trust you, Jack. We need to stay alert. If we let our guard down, we'll end up like the others." Lisa stood up and leaned over the side of the boat, her eyes scanning the shore. "This feels too quiet. I don't like it." Jack followed her gaze. The dock was empty, eerily so. There were no boats, no signs of life. Just the fog rolling in, thick and oppressive. As the boat came to a stop, Jack killed the engine. The sound of the water lapping against the dock was the only noise now, the world around them unnervingly still. They disembarked quietly, moving swiftly onto the rotting wooden pier. The air was damp, thick with the scent of saltwater and decay. It was as if they had stepped into another world, one that seemed far removed from the dangers that had followed them from the mainland. "We need to check the area before we make any decisions," Sarah said, her voice urgent as she crouched down to examine the old, weathered planks beneath her boots. Jack nodded, but the weight of Sarah's words still lingered. A traitor in their midst. The thought was almost too much to bear. They had come so far, fought so hard, and now, everything was in jeopardy. Suddenly, there was a noise, a crack of a board breaking underfoot. Jack's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, his body tensing. "Who's there?" Jack called out, his voice sharp. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a shadow emerged from behind the decaying pier shed. "Easy, Jack," a familiar voice said. Jack froze. It was Mark, a man who had been a part of their team for years, a former ally, and a trusted member of their circle. "What are you doing here?" Jack demanded, lowering his gun but keeping his guard up. Mark stepped forward, his hands raised in mock surrender. "I'm not here to fight, Jack. I'm here to explain." Lisa and Sarah exchanged wary glances, but neither made a move. Jack kept his eyes fixed on Mark. "Explain." Jack repeated, his voice cold. "Explain what? After everything that's happened?" Mark hesitated, his expression hardening. "I'm sorry, Jack. But I had no choice." Jack's heart sank. "No choice." His voice was low and dangerous. "You've been feeding information to Clay, haven't you?" Mark didn't deny it. Instead, he nodded slowly, his face full of regret. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I was just trying to protect my family. They've got leverage over me, Jack. If I didn't help them." Jack's mind raced as he processed Mark's confession. A traitor in their midst, and it was someone he had trusted, someone who had been with them from the beginning. The weight of betrayal crushed him. "You're with them?" Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been working for them all along?" Mark looked down, shame written across his face. "I didn't want this. I never wanted any of this. But once I was in, there was no way out." Jack's anger flared. He couldn't believe it. They had been set up, by someone they had trusted. "Why should we believe you now?" Sarah asked, her voice hard. Mark's gaze met hers, his eyes pleading. "Because you're still my friends. I didn't want this. But I can help you. I know where Clay is taking the next step. I can give you what you need to stop him." Jack stared at Mark for a long moment, weighing his options. Could they trust him? Or was this just another trap? Finally, Jack spoke, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "You'll help us. But one wrong move, and I'll make sure you never see another day." Mark nodded, his face pale, but he didn't argue. The wind whipped around them as Jack, Lisa, Sarah, and Mark stood in the shadow of the decaying pier shed. The betrayal still hung in the air, thick and oppressive. Mark had confessed his part in the conspiracy, and although he seemed genuine in his regret, the scars of the past few days had left Jack and the others wary. Trust was a fragile thing now, something they could hardly afford to give away. They were in a race against time, with Clay's men still on their trail. But now, they had the added burden of figuring out what Mark knew, and whether he could be trusted. Mark shifted uncomfortably under Jack's hard stare. "I know it doesn't make sense," he said, his voice strained. "But I never wanted to be part of this. I didn't realize how deep the corruption went. Once I was in, I had no choice. They had my family." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Everyone has a choice, Mark. Some just choose to fight back." Mark's face twisted with guilt. "I couldn't, Jack. You don't know what they're capable of." Lisa stepped forward, her tone measured but firm. "So, what? You're hoping we'll trust you now? After everything you've done? After feeding us to Clay?" Mark shook his head, his voice trembling. "I never wanted to put any of you in danger. I was trying to find a way out without getting anyone hurt. But now, I see how much bigger this is. I can't turn back, but I can help you stop it." Sarah's gaze flickered between Jack and Mark, suspicion still clouding her features. "How do we know you're telling the truth?" Mark met her eyes, his gaze steady. "You don't. But I'm your best shot at stopping Clay. And I'll give you everything I know. You don't have to trust me, but you need the information. And I'll help you get to him." Jack exhaled slowly, weighing his words. The anger that had burned in him when he first realized Mark's betrayal had cooled, but it had been replaced with something darker, a cold, calculating determination. He couldn't let personal feelings get in the way. If Mark had the answers they needed, then Jack would use him, but he wouldn't let his guard down. "We'll take your information," Jack said, his voice flat. "But one wrong move, Mark, and you're done. Understand?" Mark nodded, his relief evident. "Understood. I won't let you down." The team gathered around an old wooden table inside the rickety shed, the dim light of an overhead lamp casting long shadows on their faces. The fog outside was rolling in, thickening the air and muffling the sounds of the bay. The atmosphere was tense as Jack and his team listened intently to Mark's story. "Clay's operation," Mark began, "it's bigger than just Van Dorn. It's global. It's been going on for decades, and it's deeply rooted in the highest levels of government, law enforcement, and corporate circles. I've seen it firsthand, how far it reaches." Jack clenched his fists, anger bubbling up again. "What are they after? What's their end game?" Mark paused for a moment, clearly gathering his thoughts. "Control. Power. Money. It's all about maintaining power, suppressing people, manipulating governments, controlling economies. They've been orchestrating events for years, shaping everything from behind the scenes. Van Dorn was just a stepping stone in their grand plan. Alcatraz was the first test." Jack's mind raced. He'd always known there were layers to this conspiracy, but hearing it from Mark's lips made it all feel far more dangerous. "And what about the escape? The one you were a part of?" Mark's face hardened. "It was designed to distract. They wanted to keep people looking in the wrong direction while they set everything in motion. The escape, the myths around it, it kept everyone's eyes off the real operation. It wasn't just about freeing prisoners. It was a way to cover their tracks. The real masterminds have always been in the shadows." Sarah shook her head, clearly struggling to process the gravity of the situation. "How do you know all this, Mark? You said you were just a pawn in their game." "I was," Mark admitted. "But I overheard things. I saw things. There were meetings, high-level meetings, and sometimes, they didn't know I was there. I put it together piece by piece. I knew the risks, but I couldn't walk away. Not until I had a way to protect my family." Lisa leaned forward. "And you're sure Clay's behind all of this? That it's him pulling the strings?" Mark nodded slowly. Clay's one of their top people. He's been the enforcer, hunting down anyone who gets in their way, anyone who learns too much. And he's not working alone. There are others, people in positions of power, who have been helping him maintain control. Jack felt the weight of the truth settle on his shoulders. They weren't just fighting Clay anymore. They were fighting an entire network of powerful individuals, people who had been manipulating events for years, maybe even decades. "We need to find out who else is involved," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "And we need to stop them. Now." The conversation continued late into the evening, as Mark shared everything he knew, names, locations, connections, and even details about Clay's next moves. Jack, Lisa, and Sarah took notes, trying to piece together the puzzle. But with each new revelation, the stakes grew higher, and the danger more imminent. They couldn't let Clay's men find them again. They had to act fast, before the network's reach became even more deadly. But first, they had to track down the evidence that could take down Clay and the people behind him. "Where do we start?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with urgency. "We can't just keep running." "We'll start with the names Mark gave us," Jack replied. "And we'll follow the trail until we have enough to expose them all." Lisa looked at Jack, her eyes filled with determination. "Let's make sure this ends, Jack. For good." As they prepared to leave the pier, the fog surrounding them seemed to thicken, an ominous sign that they were about to enter the most dangerous phase of their journey. With Mark's information in hand, they had a plan. But it wasn't going to be easy. Clay was a shadow, untouchable, elusive. But Jack and his team had something now that they hadn't had before, a real chance to bring him down. Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They were standing at a breaking point, the point of no return. The next move they made could either be their salvation or their downfall. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far, uncovered too much. It was time to end this. Once and for all. The air was thick with tension as Jack, Lisa, Sarah, and Mark slipped through the shadows of the dilapidated warehouse district, their footsteps muffled against the wet pavement. Their destination, an abandoned building that Mark had mentioned in his briefing. It was here that they would find the next clue, the final link in the chain that would lead them directly to Clay's operation. Jack kept his senses sharp, his mind running through the details Mark had provided. The names, the locations, and the intricate web of people involved were overwhelming, but they were closer than ever. Every step now carried the weight of urgency. They couldn't afford any more mistakes. The clock was ticking. "Are we sure this is the place?" Lisa whispered, her eyes scanning the area around them. Mark nodded, his face grim. "This is it. I know the layout. We'll find what we need inside." Jack glanced around, his eyes darting from corner to corner. Something felt off. It was too quiet. The city, usually alive with the hum of activity, seemed to be holding its breath. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Stay alert," Jack ordered quietly. "We're not out of the woods yet." The group moved swiftly, crouching low against the walls as they approached the entrance. The old building loomed ahead, its broken windows like dark eyes staring out at them. It looked abandoned, but Jack knew appearances could be deceiving. When they reached the door, Mark paused, his hand resting on the handle. "We need to be careful. Clay's men might be watching. This place is a hub for their operations. If they know we're coming, they won't hesitate to act." Jack nodded, his hand tight around his weapon. "We move in quickly, in and out." "Got it?" "Got it," Sarah replied, her tone steely. The door creaked open, the sound echoing in the hollow space inside. The warehouse was cavernous, filled with shadows and dust. Broken crates and abandoned equipment were scattered across the floor. Jack's flashlight cut through the dark, illuminating the surroundings in stark relief. They moved through the building in silence, their footsteps cautious, the weight of their mission pressing down on them with every step. Mark led the way, navigating through the labyrinth of crates and rusted machinery. After a few minutes, they came to a small office at the back of the warehouse. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered from inside. "Here," Mark whispered, pointing to the door. "This is where they kept the files. The ones that can take Clay down." Jack took a deep breath, his nerves taut. "All right. Let's make it quick." The office was cramped, a dingy room filled with old filing cabinets and stacks of papers. There was a desk in the center, covered in yellowing documents and clutter. The faint buzz of a fluorescent light overhead was the only sound in the room. Lisa moved toward one of the cabinets, her fingers brushing against the worn metal. "This is it, right? The evidence?" Mark nodded, his eyes scanning the room nervously. "Yes. These files have everything. Information about the operations, the people involved, the plans for the future. It's all in there." Sarah crouched next to a pile of documents, quickly flipping through the papers. "We need to get everything. This could be the end of it all." Jack stood guard by the door, his eyes flicking back and forth, ever vigilant. But as Lisa continued to search the cabinets and Sarah rifled through the papers on the desk, something began to gnaw at him. The tension was palpable, a feeling that they were being watched. He was about to say something when a sharp noise, a click, echoed through the warehouse. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He instinctively reached for his gun, his senses heightening. "Get down," he barked, but it was too late. The sudden sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, growing louder with each passing second. Jack turned quickly, his flashlight illuminating the dark figures approaching from the shadows. They were wearing tactical gear, Clay's men, no doubt. There were at least a dozen of them, all heavily armed and prepared for a fight. "Move!" Jack shouted, pushing Sarah and Lisa toward the back of the room. "Get to the exit. Now!" The room erupted into chaos as Clay's men stormed into the office. Bullets whizzed past, slamming into the walls and sending sparks flying. Jack fired back instinctively, his shots landing with precision. He could hear Mark scrambling behind him, his breath ragged. "Where the hell did they come from?" Lisa hissed, her eyes wide with panic. "They were waiting for us," Jack muttered, his voice grim. "They knew we'd be here." Another round of gunfire exploded, sending Jack diving for cover behind a pile of crates. The sound of bullets ricocheting off metal rang in his ears. He had no idea how they'd been tracked, but one thing was clear, they were trapped. Sarah fired back, taking down one of the men in the doorway. "We need to get out of here, Jack. Now. We're not leaving without the files." Jack barked, his jaw clenched. "Hold your ground." The firefight raged on. The sound of gunfire was deafening, filling the air with a sense of desperation. Jack's heart raced as he moved from cover to cover, trying to make his way toward the desk. Lisa and Sarah were fighting tooth and nail, pushing back against the enemy, but the numbers were against them. "Jack, get to the files." Lisa shouted, firing a few more rounds before ducking behind another crate. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the desk. The files were so close, just a few more feet. But the risk of getting caught in the open was high. With a burst of adrenaline, Jack darted across the floor, moving fast and low. Bullets whizzed past him, one clipping the edge of his sleeve, but he kept moving. When he reached the desk, he threw open the drawer and grabbed the stack of files, shoving them into his bag. But just as he turned to run, a sharp voice rang out from behind him. "Not so fast, Jack." He froze. It was Clay, standing at the entrance of the office, his dark eyes gleaming with menace. His hand was on the trigger of a gun, and there was no mistaking the look on his face. "I knew you'd come for this," Clay said with a smirk, stepping forward, his voice laced with amusement. "But it's too late. You're already too far in. There's no way out now." The air was thick with tension as Jack stood frozen, the files clutched tightly in his hand. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was sharp. Clay had caught them, there was no denying that. But Jack wasn't ready to give up. Not now. Not after everything they'd been through. Clay stood at the doorway, his gun aimed directly at Jack. His grin was cold, calculating, like a man who had already won. "I have to admit," Clay said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you've come farther than I expected. But you're too late. You think these files mean something? You think they're going to stop me?" Jack didn't flinch, even though the gun was mere inches from his chest. "You're wrong, Clay. These files will destroy you. You're not untouchable. You're not as clever as you think." Clay chuckled, the sound dark and mocking. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about the files. This is about control. About power. And you, Jack, you've always been the wild card. But that ends tonight." Lisa, Sarah, and Mark were huddled together behind a stack of crates, their eyes darting between Jack and Clay. They were waiting for the right moment to act, but the standoff was growing tenser by the second. "We're not walking away from this, are we?" Sarah whispered to Lisa, her voice barely audible. Lisa shook her head. "No. We have to stop him. Whatever it takes." Clay took a slow step forward, his gun never wavering. "You think you're going to walk out of here, with those files in hand, and just expose everything? It's too late for that. I've already taken steps to make sure this operation is untouchable. The people you're working with, they're already compromised. You're surrounded, Jack. And your time is up." Jack's mind raced as he assessed the situation. He needed a plan. He needed to get out, but not without taking Clay down. The room felt smaller with every passing second. He couldn't afford to hesitate. "So, what now?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the danger. "You shoot me, and that's the end of it?" Clay's smirk faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. "You really think that's all there is to this, don't you? You've been chasing shadows, Jack. Everything you think you know, everything you've uncovered, it's part of a much bigger game. One that you can't stop. No one can." Jack's eyes narrowed. "What game? What are you talking about?" Clay took another step forward, his gun still trained on Jack. "You've been too focused on the small pieces. The escape, the files, the people behind it all. But you never asked the right question. You never realized the true goal. You see, Jack, the escape, the files, everything, it was a distraction. You're too late to stop what's coming." Jack's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" Clay finally lowered his gun slightly, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "You've been chasing the wrong leads. The escape wasn't just about prisoners, those men, the ones who supposedly disappeared, were a part of something bigger. They were test subjects. Clay's network has been orchestrating things from behind the scenes for years, and now they're ready to execute the final phase of their plan." Lisa's voice came out sharp, cutting through the silence. "What final phase?" Clay's gaze flickered to Lisa. "It's already in motion. You see, the files you have? They're just the tip of the iceberg. The real power lies in the control of information. People think they have freedom, they think they have a say. But the truth is, all of it can be manipulated. And once we control the narrative, once we control everything you believe in, it's game over." Jack's blood ran cold. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about exposing corruption. This was about total control of society. "Everything you've been fighting for," Clay continued, his voice growing darker, "has been a distraction. And now, I get to pull the strings." Sarah's eyes widened with realization. "You've been manipulating everything. The escape, the media, the government, the economy. You've had your hand in all of it. Clay smiled coldly. You're starting to understand. But it's too late for you to do anything about it. Jack stood tall, his gaze unwavering. You're wrong. We're not done yet. Without warning, Jack lunged forward, knocking the gun out of Clay's hand with a swift, well-placed strike. The two men collided in a crash of bodies, struggling for control. Clay was stronger than Jack had expected, his grip like iron as he shoved Jack into a pile of crates. Lisa and Sarah sprang into action, darting across the room toward the entrance, trying to flank Clay's men, who had been waiting for the signal to intervene. They had to buy Jack some time. Take him down, now, one of Clay's men shouted. Sarah fired back, hitting one of the men in the shoulder, knocking him to the ground. We're not going down without a fight. Mark, still trying to process everything, moved quickly to help. He grabbed a nearby metal rod, charging at one of the attackers with a scream. The sound of metal clashing against bone rang through the room. Clay, furious, reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife, slashing at Jack. The blade caught Jack's arm, a sharp pain shooting through him, but he gritted his teeth and fought back. The struggle was brutal, each move desperate and fueled by pure survival instinct. You should have stayed out of it, Jack, Clay sneered, twisting the knife in Jack's wound. But now you're here. And now you're going to die here. Jack grimaced, trying to break free from Clay's grip. Blood dripped from his arm, but he didn't give in. With a swift motion, he brought his knee up into Clay's stomach, knocking the wind out of him. Clay staggered back, momentarily stunned. End of the line, Clay. Jack shouted, using the moment to push forward. Just as Clay recovered and reached for his gun, Lisa's shot rang out, hitting Clay's arm and forcing him to drop the weapon. You're finished, Jack said through clenched teeth. Clay's face twisted with rage as he backed away, realizing that his plan was crumbling before his eyes. You think you've won? This isn't over. You can't stop what's coming, no one can. But it was too late. The momentum had shifted. The team, battered and bruised, had the upper hand. Jack stood, his voice low but filled with resolve. This is where it ends, Clay. You're done. With Clay finally restrained and his men incapacitated, Jack and his team secured the files. The dangerous game they'd been caught in was finally coming to an end. They had the evidence, they had the man, and now it was time to expose the truth. As Jack looked down at Clay, his mind raced. The truth was out there, but the fight was far from over. The world wouldn't be the same once the information got out. But one thing was certain, the team had just started a new chapter in this fight for justice. It had been 6 months since their final confrontation with Clay. The dust had settled, the world had started to understand the magnitude of what had unfolded, and the team had moved on with their lives. The escape, the mystery, the fight for justice, it was all behind them. But for Jack, it wasn't just about the end of one chapter, it was about what he had learned along the way. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Jack sat on the balcony of his apartment, the weight of the past few months sitting heavily on his shoulders. It was a beautiful afternoon, but the view didn't bring him peace. He was thinking about everything, the escape from Alcatraz, the corruption, the conspiracy, the lives lost along the way. Lisa had told him to take a break, to let go of the past. But Jack couldn't. Not just yet. He picked up his phone and scrolled through a few messages from his team, each one offering some kind of support or update on their lives. He paused at one message from Lisa, the book's done. It's out there. Lisa had written a book about their journey. It was her way of processing everything they had gone through. And it was more than just an account of the escape, it was an exploration of the lessons they had learned, the power of trust, and the fear of facing the truth. It had been a long process, but Lisa had poured everything into it. The book, titled Trust and Truth, A Journey Beyond the Escape, had already started making waves, becoming a bestseller almost overnight. People were fascinated by their story, the truth behind the escape, and the human side of it all. Lisa had found a way to make the experience relatable, to show the world the deeper lessons in it all. Jack's thoughts drifted to the other person who had been at the heart of the story, John Anglin. It wasn't a surprise, but it still hit Jack hard when he heard the news. John had passed away quietly just a few months after their mission ended. He had lived a peaceful life in the last years of his existence, free from the weight of the manhunt and the secrets he had carried for decades. The press had covered his death briefly, focusing on his connection to the infamous Alcatraz escape, but for Jack, it was more than that. John Anglin had been the key to everything. They had worked together, along with his brother, to orchestrate a daring escape all those years ago. And while the rest of the world saw him as part of the notorious escape trio, to Jack, John was a symbol of resilience. He had lived a life defined by that one moment of freedom, and it was a freedom that would haunt him forever. But in the end, John found peace. Jack had reached out to the family privately, sending his condolences. He didn't expect anything in return, just a quiet acknowledgement that, in some strange way, the cycle had ended. Lisa's book release had sparked discussions across the globe. Interviews, media tours, podcasts. It was as if their lives had become a spectacle for the world to witness. People wanted to know more about their motivations, their fears, and their ultimate choices. Jack had been hesitant at first to open up, to talk about everything that had happened. But after a while, he realized that telling their story wasn't just for the world, it was for them. He finally agreed to sit down with Lisa for a podcast episode to talk about their journey, the lessons they had learned. Sitting across from her in the studio, he had a moment of reflection. "Do you ever wonder," Lisa asked, her voice gentle, "if it was all worth it? I mean, we've lost so much, Jack. So much of ourselves, too." Jack looked at her, his gaze steady. The weight of her question hit him harder than he anticipated. He'd often wondered the same thing. But deep down, he knew what the real lesson was. He had to share it, not just for Lisa's book or for the public. He needed to say it out loud. "Yeah," Jack said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "It wasn't just about the escape. It was about trust. Trust in each other, trust in ourselves, and trust that when we face the truth, even the hard, ugly truth, it sets us free. Even when the truth shatters everything we thought we knew." Lisa nodded, her eyes softening. "We've all faced that moment, haven't we? The truth, staring us in the face, making us question everything." Jack smiled, a faint, bittersweet smile. "Yeah. And it's terrifying. But I've learned something else, too. Facing the truth, it's the only way to move forward. Even when we don't know what comes next. That's the real escape." Months passed, but the ripple effects of their actions were still being felt. Jack's reflection on the events gave him some peace, but there was still a part of him that wasn't sure the world was ready to hear the whole truth. People were still skeptical. Some believed the story was just a fairy tale, a conspiracy. They couldn't understand why it mattered, why it was so important to uncover the real story. But Jack knew the truth wasn't just about him or the team. It was about everyone who had been a part of this, the ones who had trusted him, the ones who had been betrayed, and the ones who had made the ultimate sacrifice for their freedom. As Jack sat on his balcony, looking out at the sunset, he felt a sense of finality settle over him. They had done what they set out to do. They had uncovered the truth, fought for justice, and exposed the corruption that had run rampant for decades. They had changed the world. And, in some strange way, they had changed themselves. He thought about John Anglin again, wondering if he had ever truly found peace or if he had always carried the weight of his past. But Jack knew one thing: everyone had their own way of coming to terms with the truth. And in the end, maybe that was all that mattered. The night was dark, the kind of dark that seemed to swallow the world whole. But in the quiet of the studio, the dim lights flickered to life as the recording began to play. The world had been waiting for this moment. It had been months since the final confrontation, the fall of Clay, and the revelation of the truth behind the infamous Alcatraz escape. The team had uncovered a dangerous conspiracy, one that had been years in the making. The world had witnessed it all. But there was still one question left unanswered: what happened to Frank Morris? The screen flickered, and the face of a familiar figure appeared on the screen: Jack, sitting at a desk with the worn leather-bound files scattered around him. But this time, his expression was different. He looked haunted, a man who had seen things that could never be undone. Behind him, the hum of the studio equipment buzzed faintly. The weight of the moment was palpable. Jack took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice steady, yet laden with the gravitas of the situation. "This is it. This is the final piece of the puzzle," Jack said. For years, Frank Morris was a ghost, a mystery. His escape from Alcatraz was the stuff of legend. The authorities believed he died in the waters, drowning in the cold currents off the coast of San Francisco. But what if the truth is different? What if Frank Morris was never caught? What if he was never even dead? Jack paused, his eyes flickering toward the files on the desk before him. He knew the world would be watching. They would either believe him, or they would dismiss him as a man chasing shadows. But he had to share this. After everything they had gone through, he owed it to the world. He owed it to the people who had been left with questions. And then, the moment arrived. He pressed a button, and the recording began to play. The audio was grainy, distorted. It was clear that it hadn't been recorded recently. The voice that came through was raspy, tired, but unmistakable. It was Frank Morris. "If you're watching this," Frank's voice began, "then they never got me." The words hung in the air, the shock of it reverberating through the room. Jack's heart raced as the truth sunk in. Frank Morris was alive, he had survived, and he was still out there, somewhere. The recording continued, its crackling sound making it hard to decipher every word. But Jack leaned in, straining to hear. "They'll tell you I died in the waters that night, but I didn't. I escaped. And I've been living under the radar, watching as everything unfolds. They'll never find me. I've outsmarted the system, and I'll never be caught." The voice faltered for a moment, a brief pause. Then, Frank continued, the rawness of his words cutting through the noise. "They'll try to spin it, try to tell you I'm a ghost, a myth. But I'm real. And the truth will come out eventually. Someone will uncover it, someone will ask the right questions. But don't go looking for me. I'm not the story here. The system is. The escape. That was just the beginning. The rest of the world, they'll see it soon enough." The recording ended abruptly, leaving only the sound of silence in the room. Jack's mind reeled. The room seemed to close in on him. Frank Morris was alive. He had been living in the shadows all this time. The world had been fed a lie, a fabricated story to keep people complacent, to keep the truth buried. But now, the truth was out. Frank had never been caught. And the escape? It was just the first step in a much bigger plan. Jack sat back in his chair, his thoughts racing. What did this mean? If Frank had really been free all these years, what else had been hidden from the public? What else had they missed? And then, the final question hung in the air like an unsolvable puzzle: was Frank Morris still alive? The camera zoomed in on Jack as he stared into the lens, his expression grave. "I don't have all the answers," he said quietly. "But one thing is certain, Frank Morris wasn't just a prisoner. He was a symbol. A symbol of defiance against a system that had no room for mercy. He escaped, yes. But the truth is far more complicated than we ever imagined." Jack paused for a moment, as if considering his next words carefully. Leave a comment below. Do you think anyone truly escapes the system? The camera cut to black, and the silence in the studio was deafening. The words lingered in the air like an unasked question, an open door that led to a new chapter in the saga. The world was watching. And now, the world had more questions than answers. And with that, the journey came to an end. Jack and his team had uncovered the truth about the escape, about the conspiracy, and about the powerful figures behind it all. But as they had discovered, some mysteries were never meant to be solved. The legacy of Frank Morris lived on, a symbol of rebellion, of survival against the odds. The world would continue to speculate, was Frank still alive? Was he free? Or was he just a ghost in the system, always one step ahead of those who sought to capture him? And for Jack, the journey was far from over. But as he closed the final chapter, he knew one thing for certain: the truth would always find a way to the surface, no matter how deep it was buried. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?